Hello guys, I'm here with Chapter 6 of What If Natsu Was a Lightning Dragon Slayer. Please like and subscribe if you do enjoy, and comment a series you want me to do and I'll do a full series on any. Let's begin the video. Natsu's eyes suddenly shot open, and he sat up, rubbing his forehead slightly to remove some of the sweat that had accumulated. A weird smell assaulted his senses, something he had not smelled before. It was far away, barely distinct amongst the smell of nature. However, its foreign nature was still clear to the pink-haired dragon slayer. It smelled human. However, it was the dirtiest human smell he ever had the misfortune to smell. It was positively repugnant. He scrunched up his face in absolute disgust, wondering just how a human could smell so bad. That wasn't the only thing he noticed, though. He also noticed that the horrible smell was headed straight towards Rosemary Village. As the smell got closer, Natsu began to sense multiple magical signatures, some of them having decent size while others were rather small. None of them were as big as his, Urza's, or Gramps'. Bad thoughts and feelings began to surge in his head, waking him up fully. Could there be something bad going on at the moment? If so, what could it be? It was the distant war cries that set off alarm bells in his head, not to mention the malicious nature of the magical signatures. Something was terribly wrong, and he had to wake up Gramps and Urza before something happened to them. He already lost Raggio, he would lose no one else. He jumped off his bed and was about to wake up Gramps and Urza, but the sound of footsteps stopped him from doing so. He breathed in relief when he saw that Urza and Gramps were already awake, though the expressions the latter wore on his face was grim. Urza exhibited confusion. "Gramps, can you sense that?" asked Natsu loudly. Grandpa Rob nodded. "I do, Natsu. We are under attack," he responded gravely. Urza gasped and looked over at her surrogate grandfather, her eyes wide in horror. "We are, what?" she whispered out. "We are under attack, little Urza," Rob repeated himself, a tinge of franticness manifesting in his tone. The war cries were getting nearer. "How did they find us? Aren't we isolated from the rest of Fiore?" she asked loudly, shakily. Rob nodded once again. "Yes, we are isolated. However, one of our villagers gave out our location to our attackers." At this, their eyes widened even further in shock. Who could have been so vile as to release the location of their village for these obviously dark wizards to attack? It was Milton Windstone. Rob answered their unasked question. They paled slightly in fear, a few small beads of sweat rolling down their faces. "Darius, Dad? But why?" Natsu asked. Rob sighed deeply. "I honestly don't know. But there's no time for questions, Natsu. We have to evacuate now," he ordered, earning nods of assent from his surrogate grandchildren. In unison, they ran out of the room and out the front door. Suddenly, as soon as they stepped out, a multitude of white chains sprung up, surrounding the thoroughly surprised Urza. Before they wrapped onto her, though, Rob jumped and pushed her onto Natsu, who barely had time to catch her. Tightly the chains wrapped on Rob, bringing to his knees, making him grimace slightly in pain. He tried to pull them off of him, but it was in vain. "Grandpa Rob," cried out Urza in concern, grabbing the chains and pulling. However, the moment she touched them, she suddenly felt a tad weaker in terms of magical power, and the feeling was steadily increasing the longer she held on. "Don't touch the chains, Urza," ordered Rob, surprising the girl into releasing the chains. "Get away from here. These chains will drain your magical energy." "I know how the formula works. I can still get away from them." "But you and Natsu must help the others." "I'm not leaving you, Gramps," said Natsu stubbornly. "Who knows what those people will do to you?" A feminine scream pierced through the night. Everyone stared in the direction of the scream in shock. "I'm not important right now, Natsu. You must help the others, quickly," Rob ordered gravely. "There will be no discussion about this. Go. Natsu gritted his teeth, helplessly listening to Urza's pleading voice begging Grandpa Rob to let them help him. He couldn't take it. Reluctantly deciding to follow Rob's orders, he grabbed Urza's arm. She turned and regarded him, her eyes wide with surprise. Urza, he's right, he whispered with slight harshness, hating the words that were coming out of his mouth. A similar sentiment seemed to be shared by Urza, for her eyes widened further before narrowing slightly. What? She stammered out her question. Another scream sounded, this time male, quickly followed by a cry of pain. Gramps is right. We have to help everyone else. He knows more about this kind of magic than we do. As much as I hate to admit it, we're useless to him right now, he spoke, his grip softening along with his voice. But I don't want to leave him, Urza insisted, trying in vain to wrench free from Natsu. And you think I want to, Natsu growled, shocking Urza senseless at the raw emotion shown in his eyes. You think I want to leave him to his probable death like that? Urza silently shook her head, not trusting her voice to work properly. Her pleading chocolate eyes were locked onto his own smoldering onyx eyes. I want to help him too, Natsu continued passionately. I already lost Ragio. I don't want to lose anyone else. But we've got to trust Gramps. He'll get out of this, I'm sure. The conviction in his voice, the sheer belief that Grandpa Rob would be successful in his lonesome, had her believing him in less than a second. Idly, she wondered when he had become so mature and persuasive, until it hit her. He had always been this mature and persuasive. He only showed it when he needed to, and now was one of those times. She nodded slowly, accepting the situation. Her face hardened in determination. Children, be careful. These people are amongst the worst kind, but from what I can sense, none are as powerful as you two. Now go. I'll catch up to you in a bit, reassured Rob, quickly getting to work on dispelling the magical trap. Let's go, Urza, Natsu called, jumping onto the ground in front of the porch, shortly followed by the redhead. Together they ran into the small neighborhood, seeing some of the houses catch on fire due to spells thrown by what seemed to be men dressed in black. They gritted their teeth in anger. They were possibly hurting their friends. Hey, Natsu shouted, catching the attention of a few of them. He took a deep breath, charging a considerable amount of magic. Leave them alone, you bastards, cried Urza, charging her own magic into her fists. Lightning dragons roar, fire spears. A large beam of blue lightning emerged from Natsu's mouth, alongside spears of flame from Urza's hands, and rocketed towards the raiders. They struck, causing a sizable explosion that blew quite a few of the black-clad men away from the house that they were burning. What the hell was that? Shouted one of the men in black. In response, one of them pointed at the child duo. It was them. They can use magic, replied the man that was pointing. When everyone focused on them though, realization hit them. Hey, aren't those the brats that Master Horus wants? He asked loudly, eliciting nods from the others. Yeah, it's them. Get them for Master Horus, shouted another as he launched a decently sized fireball, closely followed by a multitude of others. In unison, Natsu and Urza evaded the barrage with ease, preparing attacks of their own. Lightning Dragon's Whip. Conjuring a whip made of lightning, Natsu jumped and rapidly struck at the invaders, supported by Urza, who used her telekinesis to launch burning debris from a destroyed home at them. The men cried in pain when they were struck, providing a sense of grim satisfaction to the two children. They couldn't be faulted, of course. Those men in black were invading their home, so they had a right to feel satisfied in protecting it in that manner. Still, hurting people was never one thing they would do on purpose. Making sure that nobody was in the vicinity of the burning home, they rushed inside, only to stop dead in their tracks, their eyes wide in shock. They looked around the small, two-bedroom home. Glass and wooden debris littered the floor and the table, evidence that a great struggle had taken place. Plates were thrown asunder, the small black couch was torn and slashed, seemingly with a knife. Their eyes widened in absolute horror, and the redhead girl covered her mouth with her hand as she quickly shut them when the next sight greeted them. Natsu, on the other hand, gritted his teeth tightly, a look of fury beginning to spread over his features. In front of them was Hugo's mother, Mara, lying down on the floor with her shirt torn open, revealing her womanly body. A repugnant smell that emanated from her permeated the household, making Natsu cringe in disgust. Her eyes were wide and dull, her face was bloody, and her expression looked dead. Blood tainted her smooth skin, originating from a large wound caused by a dagger that was still lodged onto the center of her chest. Jugo was nowhere to be found. Natsu quickly embraced Urza, who grabbed his shirt tightly began to sob into his chest silently. He, too, was releasing tears, though he quickly sobered up. They may have been too late to save Mara and Jugo, but there were still others out there that they needed to save, not to mention that the house looked on the verge of collapsing. "Let's go," he spoke softly, gripping her shaking body tighter. "The house is about to collapse. We also have to go help the others." He couldn't contain the shakiness of his voice. It was obvious that these men had done a horrible thing to Mara, and it scared him. Enraged him. Feeling the redhead knot against his chest, he cleaned her tears with his hands, offering a small, unhappy smile that she barely returned. He kneeled next to Mara and gently pushed her eyelids down, effectively shutting her eyes. They both rushed out of the house, idly noticing a picture of Mara, the two of them, and Jugo, smiling without a care in the world. Shaking his head to dispel all the memories and tears that began to resurface, he continued on, vowing to himself that he would not let anyone else die. The two children rushed towards Kagura and Simon's house next, hell-bent on getting at least them to safety. From what they could see, Darius' house was completely destroyed, meaning Darius had been already attacked by these horrible people, and possibly already gone. They both felt so helpless right now. How they wished for Rob to be there with them and not chained to magic-draining chains. He would know what to do in such a bleak situation. Together they ran, shocking and burning any and all figures clad in black that reeked of malicious magical energy. Faces unrecognizable due to worn masks visibly twisted in pain as they relentlessly were struck by children almost thrice as young as them. They gave it their all, using all their repertoire of spells to bring down as many of them as possible. But, no matter what they did, no matter how hard they tried, there were always replacements for those brought down. It was a seemingly endless wave of black, highlighted by the bright red-orange flames that voraciously devoured the humble homes of Rosemary Village. They could not speak, they could not breathe. They could only wonder just why these people were ransacking their home. Was it for business? Was it for hatred? Was it for fun? Then, thoughts emerged of their traitor, Milton. Just what was he thinking when he betrayed their location to these vile excuses for human beings? No, they couldn't even be called that. They were monsters, scourges of humanity. No true human being would do such a vile thing to Mara Koslow. "Capture them," one yelled, screaming in pain just moments later due to a rather powerful shock delivered to him. They arrived at Kagura's house, bursting through the door, only to find the same exact thing that they found in Hugo's. Simon and Kagura's mother, Jenna, was lying on the floor in a manner similar to Mara, her shirt torn open, her face bloody, a repugnant smell emanating from her, and a dagger stuck onto her chest. Rage and grief, emotions that no child their age was ever supposed to feel, was beginning to consume them. How dare they do such a horrible thing to Jenna Mikazuchi? How dare they destroy a happy family in such a gruesome way? "I'll kill them," Natsu snarled uncharacteristically, making Urza reel away from him, unable to believe what she was hearing. His eyes had deadened slightly, darkened to a level that positively terrified her. He didn't even let her speak, for he had rushed outside, launching spell after spell towards the invading forces. Screams of torturous pain ensued, overshadowing the raging sizzling and crackling sounds of the fires that consumed the village. Urza exited the collapsing home after fruitlessly searching for Simon and Kagura. Everything had gone wrong in a single night. All of the friends she had made during her short 8 years of life were being torn away from her by these evil people in black. All of the adults that had taken care of her when her own parents did not do it were being murdered, and she was unable to stop it. She hated it. She could understand Natsu's rage entirely. He, too, was abandoned by his biological parents before being found by Raggio. Then, 4 years later, he lost him. She could not imagine the sheer grief he must have been feeling this entire time. And then, for these lowlife scums to do this, it must have enraged him as much as it did her. So deep she was into her own thoughts that she didn't notice an enemy fireball until it was already too close for her to evade. Her eyes grew wide in horror. She was too late to bat the flames away with her own, or create a telekinetic barrier. It would be a direct hit. Urza, Natsu's voice rang out, as she saw him running towards her from her peripheral vision. Something snapped within Natsu, making him force as much of his magic power into his body for a small boost of speed. What it caused, though, was unprecedented. A larger amount of lightning surrounded his body, increasing the pressure around the area by a considerable margin. It made some of the Zereth cultists quiver slightly as they were exposed to magic power no child should possess. Natsu zoomed forward at unprecedented speeds, stopping right in front of the fireball. Raising his hands, he summoned a large amount of lightning that he then used as a shield, blocking the explosion and redirecting it around them. Urza couldn't believe the immense speed Natsu employed to get to her and protect her. He was so fast, he literally became a mere blur surrounded by lightning. The amazement continued to increase when he simply created a veritable shield of lightning by just raising his hands. It was incredible, without hesitation, without caring about the consequences, without a single shred of mercy, Natsu charged up an immense amount of his lightning in his right hand, focusing it into his fingers and giving a razor-sharp edge. Dragon Slayer's secret art, Descaron. Swiping his hand in a wide arc, he unleashed the powerful attack, sending a large blade of lightning rocketing towards the cultists at speeds they could not comprehend, and were unable to dodge. Instantly, the blade sliced right through them, fountains of blood erupting from the now completely bisected corpses. The lightning blade continued their warpath, bisecting 2 houses as it flew skyward, the resulting shockwave killing off all the fires that were consuming them. Urza's amazement quickly became shock and horror at what he did. While he did claim that he was going to kill off the bastards that did the horrible things to Mara and Jenna, to actually execute his claim was downright terrifying. Would he go that far to protect her? She shook her head. That question was already answered. He would go that far, even if they barely knew each other for a few months. Having already lost Raggio, she was positive that he didn't want to go through such grief again. Confusion flowed through her when she noticed him frozen stiff, his magical energy output dangerously low. It was obvious that that attack had cost him a massive amount of his energy. But for him to just freeze like that in the middle of an attack? What was going on with him? Natsu, she called softly, ignoring the terrified groans of the fallen invaders and the incoming yells of more of them. Her hand landed on his shoulder, and she slowly walked around him to get a better view. Her question was immediately answered, and it broke her heart in half. His eyes were as wide as they could go, an expression of utmost horror etched into his visage. It was subtle, but she noticed that he was shaking, and tears were beginning to form. Yes, what he had done was finally sinking into his mind. He had killed people in cold blood. Even if those were heartless murderers and rapists that honestly deserved no mercy, he had killed anyway. He could see the bloody faces of those invaders staring back at him, a look of horror and fear permanently etched onto their faces. He now truly understood that saying and doing were two completely different words, with two completely different meanings and completely different implications and consequences. Without so much as a warning, Natsu fell to his knees, barely being caught by Urza before he completely collapsed. Natsu, she cried in shock. The war cries were edging ever closer, driving fear into her system. If she didn't snap Natsu out of his shock, they were as good as caught, possibly dead. Natsu, she tried, ignoring the fear-induced adrenaline that was flowing. They're coming, Natsu. Snap out of it. Please, killed them, he whispered, his eyes dead. Seeing someone be killed by someone else was terrible, if not traumatizing. Killing someone was the epitome of trauma, especially if that killer was a 9-year-old child like Natsu. I beg of you, Natsu, she implored, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Please, there they are, shouted an unfamiliar, yet obviously malicious voice. Those are the brats Master Horus wants. Capture them. The cultists had arrived, and they were surrounded. There was no way out. Urza stood up, looming over Natsu in a protective manner. She would be damned if she let anything happen to him, or her for that matter. She would protect him just like he protected her, resorting to killing if she must. Remember, men, do not hurt them, shouted one of the apparent leaders, if the different mask design was any indication. Master Horus wants them alive and well. Especially the girl. That snapped Natsu out of his shock. There was only one reason they would want Urza, and the hard evidence only seemed to point towards that inhuman act. Their master wanted to rape Urza. He stood up, rage burning within him once more, manifesting an oppressive magical aura that, though not as strong as before he launched Descaron, was still intimidating. He would be damned if he let that nasty creep touch Urza. He would kill him first. Urza followed suit, releasing her own staggering amount of magic power, easily matching his, ready to attack the surrounding enemies. She paused slightly when she noticed that small fact. She knew his magical power exceeded hers by a long shot. For her to match him must mean he was getting tired, and quickly. I won't let your creepy bastard of a master touch Urza, Natsu roared his defiance, charging lightning into his hands. It happened in less than a second. Before any of the combatants could launch their attacks, bright magic seals appeared from underneath the children, spouting out a large amount of ethereal white chains that tightly wrapped around them, cutting off all access to their magic. Crying in surprise, Natsu and Urza were pulled to the ground, struggling mightily to remove the chains. It was futile, though. The chains were just too sturdy to remove with sheer strength alone. I find myself unable to believe that two mere children were able to defeat so many of you, when adults stood little chance, spoke a new, older-sounding voice that sent shivers up everyone's spines. Pathetic, Master Horus, cried out one of the cultists. Sir, they were more powerful than expected, said another cultist, standing in front of the tall, lanky middle-aged master. Silence, snarled Horus, gutting the foolish cultist with a dagger procured from his outfit. The stabbed cultist screamed in pain and spat out blood, falling to his knees when the cruel master yanked the blade from his abdomen. Everyone stared in silence, the chained children looking at Horus with horror in their eyes. Such a despicable act could only be committed by a monster that was incarnated in that man. Report, he ordered loudly. One of the cultists stepped up and kneeled down, his head lowered. Marin, Master Horus, village has been raided successfully. All inhabitants have been taken care of as planned, even the old man, reported Marin, raising his head up, looking at his master through the mask. I see. Then that means everything worked out well, Horus asked, a malicious glint in his eye. Shaken slightly, Marin continued, Why, yes, sir. The only problem was those two kids. Then not everything worked out as planned, right? Questioned Horace again, subtly preparing a spell. And no, sir, was all Marin could reply before being blasted back by a shockwave, crashing into the ashes of a once burning home. Now, where were we? He asked rhetorically, completely ignoring the painful cries. Ah, yes, our esteemed guests. Natsu gritted his teeth as he saw the positively creepy man inch his way closer to Urza, obviously moving slowly for increased dramatization. He lifted a hand and moved it closer to the terrified redhead, who tried to move as far away as the chains could permit her. This didn't deter Horace, for he just reached forward and caressed her cheek with mock tenderness. Urza noticeably shivered in disgust, her face scrunched up. "Don't touch her," Natsu shouted, struggling with his chains, causing a racket. "Such smooth skin," he simpered, ignoring Natsu's racket. "I dare say you have the smoothest skin of anyone I have ever been with." "Don't touch me," whispered Urza venomously. "Don't touch me or I'll hurt you." Ahaho. Such feistiness. I love that in my women, he laughed boisterously, driving the wedge of fear deep into Urza's chest. It was obvious what he meant, and what he had planned for her. He once again caressed her, the redhead almost hyperventilating in fear and disgust, adrenaline screaming through her veins. "No need to be afraid, my sweet," he soothed, though it had the absolute opposite effect on Urza. "I promise to be gentle, don't touch her," roared Natsu, lunging forward futilely, for the chains had not budged. "Someone silence the dragon boy, please." His voice at the moment is aggravating, said Horace snidely, carelessly looking at Natsu as one of the cultists drove a foot deep into his gut. Natsu's eyes widened in pain, coughing out saliva as he fell prone on the ground, gasping. "Natsu," cried Urza, hating the fact that her closest friend was going through pain, and she was unable to do anything about it. "Don't worry about him, my dear," spoke Horace, running a hand down her face and neck, passing through her shoulders and landing on her upper arm. Urza shivered at the ministrations in pure disgust, dread clenching her heart. He lackadaisically removed his cloak, letting it drop on the ground beside him. Releasing her chains, but leaving her with shackles, he attempted to move her onto the cloak. She wouldn't have any of it. Noticing she had a free hand, she lunged at the cultist master and slashed his cheek open, drawing considerable amounts of blood. Crying and cursing in pain, Horace jumped back, giving the girl the freedom to rush to Natsu. "Master Horace," cried one of the cultists, running to his master, before being blown back by a tongue of fire, his skin charring deeply. The cultist screamed the entire way. "You bitch," he growled dangerously, standing up and dusting himself off. "Urza," gasped Natsu as he felt her soft hands land on his back. With a grunt of effort, he pushed himself up, allowing him usage of his body as a shield for the catatonic redhead, who tightly gripped his shirt. "I tried to be nice," spoke Horace venomously. "I tried to give you a modicum of pleasure, and without an audience. But now, none of that. The tone in which he spoke drove massive shivers down the two children, who could only dread what Horace was about to speak next as he approached them, his hands extended towards the redhead. "No, now, I will take you with no mercy, and in front of all my men, even your little boyfriend," he snarled, gripping the girl's wrist painfully. She cried in pain and weakly tried to struggle. "I'll ravage you and make you bleed," he continued his sadistic rant, maniacally laughing afterwards. "I'll enjoy your dulcet screams of pain, little bitch." He was about to succeed in pulling her off, when he felt sharp fangs grip his leg in a bite with strength no human should be capable of. He roared in pain, and noticed the pink-haired dragon slayer mightily gripping his left calf, drawing blood that stained half of his face. "You son of a bitch," he screamed, driving a powerful kick into Natsu's ribs, enjoying the sound of one of them cracking. Still, to his utter surprise, the brat did not let go, the grip seemingly tightening even further. The only sign of him actually feeling any pain was the scrunching of his eyes and the small growl that erupted from him. Putting even more force, he stomped on his stomach, cracking a few more ribs and completely driving the air out of the 9-year-old child. This time, Natsu let go, screaming in utter agony as blood flew from his lips. Urza watched in unbridled horror as blood poured from Natsu's mouth, his now torn shirt revealing his badly bruised abdomen to her. She did not have the mental faculties to notice herself being lifted into the air by the cultist leader, or being forcefully dropped onto the grounded cloak. "I'll kill you," spoke Natsu weakly, gasping in pain with every breath that he took, watching the limping man take away Urza from him. His anger skyrocketed when he noticed Horace ignore him and stick his tongue out, obviously wanting to lick the now crying girl. "Lick her, you fucking bastard, and I'll fucking kill you." "Milton, silence this child, permanently," Horace ordered ominously into the crowd. Without preamble, the reclusive father of Darius Windstone stepped forward, removing his mask and donning a small dagger in hand. "He's ruining my fun. I want to see him bleed to death, Milton. I don't care if the higher-ups lose a slave. There are plenty more villages to raise." Natsu looked over at Milton, his eyes filled with dread, and noticed something he thought he would not see in the trader of Rosemary Village: regret and hesitation. His dreadful anticipation increased when the man kneeled down and lifted the dagger above him. "No, Natsu," he could idly hear Urza scream in utter horror. "Forgive me, Natsu," whispered Milton, the apology's sincerity more than palpable. As if in slow motion, the dagger descended upon his bruised gut. Natsu knew. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was Urza's hand extended towards him, her eyes wide in terror and despair as tears flowed out like a river. It was over. Natsu Dragio was dead. Darkness. That was all that surrounded him. He was alone, stuck in the middle of an abyss, with nothing to spare him from its suffocating presence. He could hear her, crying his name out in utter despair. A crushing feeling of hopelessness and powerlessness invaded his entire being. There was nothing he could do now. He was dead, stabbed through the gut with a dagger by one of the people he actually considered a friend. He was unable to save Gramps, Mara, Jenna, Darius, Jugo, Kagura, Simon, anyone. He was unable to save everyone because he was weak. Weak. He would not be able to fulfill his promise to his father and become the next Lightning Dragon King. He would not grow strong enough to find Igneel and then kill Acnologia. He would now do nothing. And now, he would depart into the afterlife with the knowledge that he couldn't even help Urza escape the now inhuman act that was about to be performed on her. Was this really how it was supposed to end? No, not while I'm here. Nothing in the world could have remotely prepared them for this. Nothing could have prepared them for the horrific resonance of magical energy emanating from the dead child. Nothing could have prepared them for the crushing feeling of fear that invaded their systems as they fell onto their knees. Nothing. The only one standing in the entire vicinity was Natsu, or what appeared to be Natsu. The wound caused by Milton's dagger was but a distant memory, and all the wounds he sustained from Horace beating were completely gone. He was completely healed, almost as if he possessed regeneration of some sort. The sheer amount of oppressive magical energy he was releasing bore down upon the humans, slamming them down to the floor like a hammer. The vileness of the magical pressure was incomprehensible for the invaders. Never in their lives had they felt something so foul, so gut-wrenching, and so downright hellish. Fear was the only word that registered in their numbed minds. Those nearest to him were merely blown away by the resultant shockwave of the explosive burst, flying through the air like ragdolls before crashing upon different destinations. Horace was blown away from Urza, leaving her with her shirt lifted slightly and her shorts unfastened. The glistening of saliva was visible in her neck and left cheek, though the latter was washed away by the tears that flowed. She had a deadened expression on her face, her mind, body and soul resigned to the terrible fate that seemingly awaited her. It was only when she saw the magical energy burst from Natsu that she came back to life. At first, relief flooded her like a raging river. But she couldn't understand. His aura, instead of the regal, royal blue color that was trademarked to his magic, was now red, an eerie, evil blood red. Not to mention, the sheer amount was far greater than anything she had ever felt before in her time with him. And the feeling was completely foreign, completely unable to be related to his warm, welcoming one. This aura terrified her, quickly confirming one thing. This was not Natsu, it was some kind of monster. Without so much as a warning, Natsu looked up into the sky and unleashed an ungodly shriek that shook the entire village and drove a stake of fear deeper into everyone's chest. Red lightning rained from the sky onto his form, surrounding him and arcing out into the vicinity. Suddenly, Natsu leaned forward and lunged, straight towards Horus. The targeted man could only cry out in surprise as the supposedly dead child barreled into him and pushed him all the way back onto the rubble of a house. He tried to attack the boy, only to fail miserably. Screams of pain would be the last thing Horus would be able to articulate, for he was torn apart, quite literally. First, Natsu gripped the arms of the man that almost raped Urza, his fingers actually puncturing the skin, drawing blood that stained his hands and face. Then, without any mercy at all, he yanked the arms, making everyone watch in horror as skin, bone and muscle was relentlessly ripped apart and carelessly thrown to the sides, unleashing a geyser of blood that seemed to spurt endlessly. The horror only continued as Natsu dug his fingers into the agonizing man's chest and tore chunks of his pectoral cavity, throwing them away just like the severed arms. Fear and pain could only register in Horus' mind as he watched the supposedly dead dragon boy grip his jaw with both hands before mercilessly breaking it open, revealing his erratically lolling tongue. Gripping the wet muscle as if it were dry, the transformed 9-year-old tore it from his mouth before frying it with red lightning until turned to ash. As a finisher, Natsu charged up an intense amount of lightning in his hands before slamming them onto Horus' body, causing a frighteningly large explosion that shook the ground everyone stood on and produced gale force winds that blew a huge cloud of dust towards the invaders and Urza. When the explosion cleared, there was only Natsu. Horus' body was gone, most likely turned to ash. My God, thought Milton in pure, unadulterated shock. Such power emanating from him. And so dark and foreboding. This is it, the power from within Natsu. How could a child bear something so horrifying, so foul? What is that thing? This can't be Natsu, thought Urza in horror, her heart beating at speeds she never felt before, her entire body cold and shaky with sweat. Despairing tears leaked faster than before as she bore witness to the sheer brutality that her best friend showcased. This isn't Natsu. This is a monster. Unexpectedly, Natsu stood and swiped his right hand, unleashing a large wave of blood-red electricity that sailed towards the raiders at unavoidable speeds, bisecting the unfortunate ones caught in the attack's way. Once again, without so much as a warning, Natsu opened his mouth, a blood-red orb of electricity appearing in front of his gaping maw. It quickly grew large, easily exceeding the size of his head. Primal instinct fueled Milton's next move, prompting him to stand up, rushed toward the now unchained Urza, who was only staring at Natsu in unbridled shock and horror, picked her up, and jumped to the side. Utterly lucky were perfect words to describe their predicament, for the moment they touched the ground, an enormous beam of red lightning zoomed past them, utterly disintegrating all houses that were somehow still standing and taking away what was left of the raiders. Cries of shock and a modicum of pain emerged from the child and adult, their minds instantly registering just how close they were to death. Both survivors watched in absolute awe and terror as the incomprehensibly powerful beam of foul magic tore through the forest like a knife through butter, Distant shrieks of pain ensued, the obvious perpetrators being the unfortunate inhabitants that were caught in the crossfire. When it exploded, though, new levels of shock were reached. A large, blood-red pillar of electricity rose into the air, with a dome-shaped base surrounded by a smoke ring, easily towering over the tree canopies. The ensuing shockwave uprooted many of the trees, the gale-force wind sending them even farther than intended. The ground shook with much more intensity than before, the cracking and groaning easily discernible amongst the cacophony of sound. The explosion cleared, leaving behind an immense crater that could have easily fitted the entire Rosemary village into it rather snugly. Urza and Milton stared in utter awe at the staggering display of power. Whatever this creature was that had taken over Natsu, it certainly packed power no normal 9-year-old should possess. They were too focused on the crater to notice Natsu raise his head into the air, unleashing another unearthly shriek that only belonged in the depths of hell itself. They covered their ears, lest they burst at the overwhelming sound that assaulted them. What happened next completely surprised them, for Natsu had lunged towards Milton, completely ripping him off the prone redhead. Then, with not a shred of mercy, the possessed 9-year-old charged up electricity in his right hand and stabbed the traitorous father of Darius in the chest, piercing his heart. Milton's eyes widened in shock and pain, blood spurting from his mouth. It stained the strangely clean child's face. It was then that he saw them, soulless, pitch-black eyes bereft of emotion and life, staring deep into his soul, piercing him completely. It was a terrifying sight that he would take to the grave, along with the fact that it was caused by him. Yes, Milton Windstone had brought forth his own death. But there was no fear, only relief. Finally, I am free from my accursed existence. I thank you, creature. Darius, forgive me, Milton thought, his sight growing dark. Maria, I will join you now, my love. With that, Milton Windstone, former village recluse and traitor of Rosemary Village, died with a small smile on his face. Natsu stood up, turning his soulless black stare onto Urza. The redhead in question could only stare back, unable to tear her eyes from her possessed best friend. Dread was clawing at her heart. Was she next? It was then that Natsu began shrieking in excruciating agony. He gripped his head and fell to his knees, prompting a worried cry from the redhead as she instinctively rushed towards the child that had saved her from a despicable fate. Natsu, she cried, almost reaching him until that frightening red lightning began to course around him once more. This time, though, it swirled around erratically, the pattern completely unlike the vortex that surrounded him at the beginning of his possession. Then, to her utter shock and teary relief, the once vile blood-red lightning aura slowly but steadily shifted back into the royal blue she was so familiar with. Looking up at his soulless eyes, she saw the inky blackness literally bleeding away from the center, revealing his deadened onyx eyes for a mere moment before they shut completely as he collapsed to the ground. Natsu, she cried once again, embracing him to prevent his fall. She shivered in dread when she felt his ice-cold body, and his non-existent breathing. Fear for his life gripped her mercilessly once more, prompting her to literally slam her ear into his chest. What she heard was a sound she would forever love in the future, forever hold amongst the dearest things of her existence, his heartbeat. Natsu Dragio was alive. She couldn't contain it. She couldn't contain the waterworks of relief that began to flood her chocolate-brown eyes. She embraced him tighter than ever, wailing her relief into the night, uncaring of the fact that there was a copious amount of blood and dismembered bodies surrounding them. It didn't even matter that Natsu had done it, for the nightmarish acts were not really committed by him in the first place. A tiny, feminine hand landed on her shoulder, snapping her out of her relieved stupor. Looking up in surprise, she saw a slightly disheveled, slightly dirty, bloodshot-eyed, but otherwise completely healthy Kagura Mikazuchi. Her relief could not have soared higher that dreadful night. Dragging her down almost forcefully, she tightly embraced the purple-haired 6-year-old girl, crying even harder into the night, prompting the young child to follow suit. They had lost everything. They were alone in the world, Kagura for the first time, Urza for the second, and Natsu for the third. There was nothing they could salvage of their once peaceful life here in Rosemary Village. Their families were gone, forcefully torn away from them on that dramatic night, a night they would forever revile as the worst night of their lives. For hours on end the two girls cried, the pink-haired dragon slayer undisturbed by the sound. No animal dared approach the destroyed village, instinctual fear of the red lightning etched deep into their memory. The 3 survivors of the siege of Rosemary Village fell into blissful unconsciousness there, their grip unrelenting on each other, their heads falling on the chest of the now fully prone Natsu. They were alone in the world, but they would be alone together. Eyes snapped open, belonging to a woman of deceptively youthful beauty. She had sensed it. Looking into the sky, she could only smile, a smile of longing, of desire, of love. You have finally awakened, my beloved. We will finally be reunited. Soon.